Welcome back, guys, to Battleground Stories. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. Thank you. September 1994, Western Amazon Basin, Brazil. The Echo 7 Joint Training Area near the Juruá River. The heat was concentrated at the treetops. Smoke turned the daylight orange. I was Captain Wade Harlow, leading a multinational reconnaissance team under Operation Firebreak. We had been tasked with assessing the source of the forest fires that had been burning for 3 weeks. I was counting my breaths. The smell of coal and hot metal dominated the forest. I noticed something moving among the burnt trees in front of me. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was darker than the ash around it. It stopped next to a charred ceiba tree, turned toward us, and then disappeared into the smoke. That was how it all began, and that was reason enough for us not to be there. We had flown in from Fort Bragg 6 weeks earlier. The mission was listed as environmental cooperation between U.S. Southern Command and Brazilian Army's Jungle Infantry Brigade. Official purpose: wildfire containment assessment and support. Unofficial purpose: investigate why 3 separate fire teams had gone dark in the same sector over 2 months. No distress calls, no bodies recovered, just silence and coordinates that led to ash. My unit consisted of 12 men, 4 American Rangers, 6 Brazilian Special Forces, and 2 environmental officers. Sergeant Dean Mercer was my second Georgia boy who'd done 2 tours in Panama. Corporal Rafael Costa led the Brazilian contingent, compact and sharp, fluent in 3 languages, and trained in jungle warfare since childhood. The environmental team included Dr. Sarah Vance from the EPA and Professor Miguel Torrens from Sao Paulo University. They were scientists, not soldiers, but they'd requested to join after reviewing satellite imagery. They said the burn patterns didn't match natural fire progression. We staged at Forward Operating Base Chimera, a temporary structure built on cleared ground 20 miles from the active burn zone. Corrugated metal roofs, canvas walls, diesel generators running constant to power radios and refrigeration units. The heat was total. Even at night, temperatures held above 90 degrees. Humidity made every breath feel wet. We slept in shifts, always listening to radio chatter from fire suppression teams working the perimeter. The fires had started in late July, lightning strikes, according to initial reports. But they spread wrong. Instead of moving with prevailing winds, the burns jumped in random directions, crossing rivers, bypassing dry fuel, igniting in perfect circles. By August, over 400 square miles were scorched. International agencies sent water-bombing aircraft, but the flames kept regenerating in areas already doused. Satellite thermal imaging showed hot spots appearing miles from active fires, burning intensely for hours before dying out completely. That's when they called us in. Our mission brief was simple on paper. Enter the core burn zone. Document fire behavior. Locate any remaining personnel from previous teams. Extract if possible. Rules of engagement. Carry live rounds, but only for wildlife threats. Radios checked every 4 hours. Emergency extraction available within 30 minutes by helicopter. It should have been reconnaissance. It turned into something else entirely. I built the operational plan by standard doctrine. 4-man point team, 4-man support, 4 environmental checkpoints per day. The number 4 became our rhythm. 4 hours between radio calls, 4 men on watch rotation, 4 supply caches along our route. The pattern kept us disciplined when heat and smoke worked to break concentration. On September 12th, we moved out at dawn. The forest was already burned black at the perimeter. Trees stood like charcoal pillars, some still smoking faintly. The ground crunched under boots, ash mixing with dry leaves that somehow survived. The smell hit first, not just wood smoke. Something chemical underneath, like burning plastic or oil. Dr. Vance took air samples immediately. She said the particulate composition was wrong for natural forest fire. We pushed deeper. After 2 hours, the canopy closed overhead, still green but filtering light through layers of smoke. Visibility dropped to 50 yards. The heat intensified. I ordered water discipline, 4 sips per hour, no more. Sweat soaked through our uniforms in minutes. Mercer pointed out that animal sounds had stopped completely. No birds, no insects, no monkey calls. The jungle was silent, except for our movement. At the first checkpoint, Costa found something unusual, a clearing, perfectly circular, roughly 30 meters across. The ground inside was burned down to mineral soil, but the vegetation at the edges showed no scorch marks, no transition zone, just a hard line between burned and unburned. Dr. Vance knelt and tested the soil temperature. Still warm, she said, even though satellite imagery showed this area had burned 4 days prior. I marked the coordinates. We photographed everything. Professor Torrens examined the tree line and found something that made him stop. He called me over quietly. There, carved into a ceiba trunk at chest height, were symbols. Not Portuguese, not any indigenous language he recognized. The cuts were fresh, sap still sticky, arranged in groups of 3. 3 lines, then 3 circles, then 3 triangles. He said it reminded him of warning markers, but he'd never seen this pattern before. Mercer wanted to know if previous teams had left them. I checked the mission logs. No mention of marking trees. I photographed the symbols and reported via radio. Base command acknowledged and told us to continue mission. That night, we established a defensive perimeter on high ground, overlooking the burn zone. The smoke created a strange twilight effect. Sunset came early, filtered through layers of gray and orange. I set watch rotation and checked equipment. Radios functioning normally. GPS coordinates stable. Morale acceptable despite heat stress. At 2100 hours, the first anomaly occurred. Our northern motion sensor triggered without visible cause. Mercer investigated with night vision. He reported heat signatures beyond the perimeter, inconsistent with known wildlife. Shapes moving upright, too tall for jaguars, too broad for tapirs. He counted 4 distinct forms before they faded into deeper forest. I logged it as possible displaced wildlife. Fires often drove animals into unusual behavior patterns. Still, something about his description bothered me. He said they moved together, coordinated, like they were patrolling. The smell returned after midnight. That same chemical scent mixing with smoke and something else. Something organic and rotten, like meat left in sun. It came in waves, thick enough to make your eyes water. Dr. Vance checked her instruments and found elevated sulfur compounds in the air. She said it could indicate underground coal seams burning, but there were no known deposits in this region. At 300 hours, Corporal Costa woke me. He'd heard sounds beyond the tree line, not animal calls. 3 distinct knocks, evenly spaced, like wood striking wood. I listened. After 2 minutes, it came again. 1, 2, 3. Clear and deliberate. I raised the unit to alert status and sent 2 scouts forward with thermal imaging. They returned 15 minutes later. No contacts, no heat signatures, but they'd found fresh tracks pressed into ash, large, human-shaped, but wrong proportions. Toes too wide, heel too deep, stride length over 6 feet. Costa said they looked like the prints locals called Mapinguari tracks in old stories. Forest giants that walked on 2 legs and marked territory with knocking sounds. I didn't believe in local legends, but I believed in evidence. The tracks were real. Something large had circled our position and left without approaching. I ordered perimeter tightened and doubled the watch. No one slept easy after that. Morning came with thick fog rolling up from the valleys. Visibility dropped to 20 feet. We ate cold rations and broke camp in silence. The forest felt different in daylight. Oppressive. The burned areas seemed to watch us as we passed. Several times I caught movement in peripheral vision, shapes between trees, but nothing there when I turned to look. By midday, we reached the second checkpoint. This was deeper into the core burn zone, where fires had reportedly burned hottest. What we found didn't match any natural fire pattern I'd ever seen. A village, or what remained of one. 15 structures, all traditional indigenous construction reduced to ash and framework. But the burn was selective. Some buildings were completely destroyed while adjacent ones showed no fire damage at all. Cooking pots sat undisturbed next to collapsed walls. Fabric hammocks hung intact between charred support posts. It looked deliberate, like something had chosen what to burn. Dr. Vance examined the site and found no human remains. Professor Torrens discovered more symbols carved into standing posts, same pattern as before. 3 lines, 3 circles, 3 triangles, repeated on every intact structure. Costa spoke with the Brazilian team in Portuguese, then translated. He said this was an abandoned Catuquina settlement. The tribe had left 6 months ago, claiming the forest had turned against them. They reported hearing voices in smoke, seeing shapes that walked like men but weren't human, finding their food stores destroyed and marked with symbols they didn't recognize. I radioed base command with our findings. The response took longer than usual. When it came, the orders were clear: document everything, avoid speculation, continue to primary objective coordinates. We pushed forward. The terrain grew difficult. Burned timber had collapsed across game trails. We had to cut new paths through dense undergrowth that somehow survived the fires. The work was slow, exhausting in the heat. By late afternoon, we'd covered less than 4 miles. That's when Mercer found the first body. It wasn't human, too large. The remains were partially burned but recognizable as some kind of primate, except the proportions were wrong. Arms too long, skull too heavy. The jaw showed teeth that didn't match any known species. Dr. Vance estimated it weighed over 300 pounds. She said it looked like a prehistoric specimen, something that shouldn't exist in modern ecology. We bagged samples and marked the location. 200 yards further, we found 3 more, all similar size, all arranged in a rough circle around a central burn point. The ground there was scorched down to bedrock, still radiating heat. Whatever had killed them had burned hot enough to melt sand into glass. Professor Torrens examined the site and made a connection. He said the Catuquina legends spoke of forest protectors called Curupira, spirits that defended the jungle from intruders. They were said to appear during times of great ecological stress, always in groups of 3 or 4, always marking their territory with symbols and sounds. I told him we dealt in facts, not folklore. But even as I said it, I remembered the tracks, the knocking sounds, the shapes Mercer had seen moving together in coordination. Something was in these woods with us, something that understood pattern and purpose. We made camp that evening on a ridge overlooking a river valley. Smoke obscured most of the view, but we could see fire glow on the horizon. Active burns, miles across, forming shapes that looked almost geometric. Dr. Vance photographed it and said the pattern matched no known wildfire behavior. At dusk, the temperature dropped suddenly. Within minutes, we went from 90 degrees to what felt like 70, unnatural for this climate. The smoke thinned slightly, and for the first time in days, we saw stars. Then the knocking started again. This time, it was closer, coming from multiple directions. 1, 2, 3 from the north. 1, 2, 3 from the east. 1, 2, 3 from our rear. We were surrounded. I called for defensive formation. Everyone armed, eyes on tree line, safeties off. The knocking continued for 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was total. Even the river seemed to stop flowing. That's when we smelled it again. Burning metal and rotting meat, so strong it made several men gag. Costa pointed to the ridge slope. Heat signatures appeared on thermal imaging, 4 of them, tall and broad, standing motionless just beyond visible range. I made the call. We would hold position until dawn, then extract to base camp. This mission had gone beyond environmental assessment. We were dealing with something that required different resources, but the radio wouldn't connect. We tried 4 times on different frequencies, only static. Our GPS units showed coordinates that drifted randomly. The equipment was failing without cause. Mercer suggested we move now, while we still had visibility. I agreed. We broke camp fast, taking only essential gear. The plan was to follow our entry route back to the first checkpoint, then call for emergency extraction. We didn't make it 400 yards before the trees started falling. Not burning. Falling. Massive trunks, some over 100 feet tall, crashing down across our path. They hit with enough force to shake the ground. No wind, no fire. Just trees toppling in sequence like dominoes. The sound was deafening. We scattered, trying to avoid the falling timber. I lost sight of half my team in the chaos. Dust and ash filled the air. I could hear shouting, but couldn't determine direction. When the crashes finally stopped, I counted heads. Everyone present, except 2 Brazilian specialists. I called their names. No response. Costa organized a search grid. We found them 10 minutes later, alive, but trapped under a fallen log. It took all of us to lever it off them. One had a broken arm, the other severe bruising. Both were conscious and mobile with support. We needed extraction now, but communication was still dead. That's when Costa pointed behind me. Through the settling dust, shapes moved between the standing trees. Tall, dark, human-like, but not human. 4 of them, standing in a line, watching us. They didn't approach. They just stood there, motionless, like they were waiting for something. I raised my rifle, not threatening, just ready. The shapes didn't react. After a full minute, they turned in unison and walked deeper into the forest. Their movement was smooth, coordinated, almost mechanical in precision. Within seconds, they vanished into smoke. We held that position for another 20 minutes. Nothing else moved. The forest remained silent. Finally, I made the decision to push toward the river. Water meant better navigation and possible communication lines. As we moved out, I noticed something carved into a tree directly in our path. The same symbols as before. 3 lines, 3 circles, 3 triangles, fresh cuts, sap still wet. They'd marked this tree while we were trapped under the fallen timber. They'd been close enough to touch us. That realization changed everything. Whatever was out here, it wasn't just observing, it was controlling our movement, herding us toward something. The question was, toward what? We reached the river by late afternoon. The Juruá ran slow and dark, reflecting smoke-filled sky like oil. The water level was low, exposing muddy banks covered in ash. We set up a temporary position on high ground with clear sight lines in all directions. Mercer established communications equipment while Costa tended to the injured men. I tried the radio again. Static, then a brief break. A voice came through, distorted but recognizable as base command. I reported our status. 2 injured, equipment malfunction, requesting immediate extraction. The response was broken. I caught fragments. Unable to confirm coordinates. Fire activity increasing. Hold position until... Then nothing. Dead air. Dr. Vance checked her instruments and found electromagnetic interference far beyond normal levels. She said it was consistent with intense electrical activity, like continuous lightning strikes, but the sky was clear of storms. Professor Torrens suggested the fires themselves might be generating some kind of plasma field, though he admitted that shouldn't be possible with organic fuel sources. As the sun dropped lower, the smoke took on colors I'd never seen. Deep purples and greens mixed with orange, creating patterns that moved against the wind. The effect was hypnotic, almost beautiful if you forgot what it meant. The fires were spreading in ways that defied natural explanation. Costa approached me quietly. He said his men were talking about the Boyuna, the great serpent spirit that protected the Amazon. According to local belief, the Boyuna appeared when the forest was threatened, manifesting as fire and flood to drive away intruders. He didn't say he believed it, but I could see the question in his eyes. I told him the same thing I told Torrens. We dealt in observable facts. Whatever was happening had a rational explanation. We just hadn't found it yet. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. At 1800 hours, the forest went absolutely silent, not gradually, all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The river stopped making sound. The wind died completely. Even our own movements seemed muted, as if the air itself had thickened to absorb noise. That's when I saw them on the far bank. 4 figures, standing in a perfect line at the water's edge. Tall, easily 7 or 8 feet. Broad shoulders, long arms, covered in what looked like dark hair or burnt vegetation. They stood motionless, facing our position. Not hiding, not approaching, just watching. I signaled for the team to hold fire. Through binoculars, I tried to get better definition, but smoke and distance blurred details. What I could see made no sense. The proportions were wrong for any primate species, the stance too upright, too balanced. And they stayed perfectly still for over 5 minutes, not even shifting weight. Then, in unison, all 4 turned their heads to the left. They stood like that for another minute, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Then they turned back toward us, and I swear I saw one of them raise an arm and point directly at our position. A second later, they were gone. Not running, not walking away, just gone, as if the smoke had swallowed them whole. Mercer whispered that he'd gotten it on thermal imaging. He showed me the recording. 4 heat signatures, human-shaped but larger, standing at approximately 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Too hot for living creatures. The temperature should have killed any mammal instantly. Yet they'd moved with perfect coordination. Dr. Vance reviewed the footage and went pale. She said there was no biological explanation for what we'd just seen. Professor Torrens said nothing, but I saw him make the sign of the cross. As darkness fell, we moved away from the river to a more defensible position. I wanted solid rock behind us and clear fields of fire. We found an outcropping that met requirements and set up night defensive positions. 4-hour watches, 2 men per shift, everyone armed with live rounds. The temperature dropped again after sunset. Within an hour, it felt closer to 60 degrees. Impossible in this region, this season. Some of the men started shivering despite the earlier heat. I noticed condensation forming on metal equipment. Our breath showed faintly in the air. At 2100 hours, the knocking started again. But this time it was different. Not 3 strikes. 4. 4 knocks from the north, 4 from the east, 4 from the south, 4 from the west. Perfect cardinal points, perfectly timed. The sound echoed across the valley, each knock resonating like a drum. I felt it in my chest, in my bones. The rhythm was deliberate, almost ceremonial. It continued for exactly 4 minutes, then stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, expectant. Costa told me his grandfather had been a rubber tapper in this region. He'd spoken of the Quattro Guardiões, the 4 guardians that protected the deepest parts of the forest. They appeared only when the jungle itself was dying, taking form from ash and smoke to drive away the source of destruction. His grandfather had seen them once, he said, 4 figures made of fire and shadow, walking between the trees, marking their passage with sounds that shook the earth. I asked him if he believed that. He said it didn't matter what he believed. What mattered was what was happening to us right now. At midnight, our motion sensors triggered on all sides simultaneously. Whatever was out there had surrounded us completely. Thermal imaging showed at least 8 distinct signatures, all maintaining a perfect circle around our position at approximately 200 yards distance. They didn't move closer. They just held position like they were containing us. I made the call to stay put and stay alert. We had ammunition and defensible ground. If they attacked, we'd respond. But something told me attack wasn't their intention. They were doing something else, waiting for something. The smell returned stronger than before. Burning metal, rotting flesh, and something else underneath. Something ancient and wrong, like opening a tomb that had been sealed for centuries. Several men started vomiting. I fought the urge myself, breathing through my mouth, counting to 4 between each breath. At 200 hours, one of the Brazilian specialists started screaming. He pointed toward the tree line, saying he saw faces in the smoke, dozens of them, floating between the trees, watching us with empty eyes. Costa tried to calm him, but the man kept screaming until Mercer had to physically restrain him. I looked where he'd pointed and saw nothing, just smoke and shadow. But for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw movement. Shapes that almost looked human, drifting through the haze like ghosts. Then they were gone, and I wasn't sure I had seen anything at all. The screaming soldier finally calmed, but he kept whispering in Portuguese. Costa translated quietly. He was saying, "They're not alive. They're not dead. They're what the forest makes when it needs to defend itself. We shouldn't be here. We were never meant to find this place." Dawn came slowly, filtered through layers of smoke that seemed thicker than before. The heat returned with daylight, climbing fast from 60 to 90 degrees in less than an hour. The thermal signatures around our position had disappeared sometime before first light. We were alone again, or appeared to be. I ordered a perimeter sweep. Mercer led a 4-man team in expanding circles, checking for tracks, signs, anything that would explain what had surrounded us. They returned with disturbing findings. The ground around our position had been marked, not with symbols this time, with burn marks. Perfect circles, each exactly 4 feet in diameter, arranged in a ring around where we'd camped. 8 circles, evenly spaced, exactly where the thermal signatures had stood. The burns were fresh, ash still warm, but there was no indication of what had caused them. No fuel source, no accelerant traces, just scorched earth in perfect geometric patterns. Dr. Vance took samples, but her instruments were malfunctioning. She said the electromagnetic interference was stronger than before, peaking at levels that should have fried our electronics completely. Yet somehow our equipment still functioned, if barely. Professor Torrens examined the burn circles and found more symbols carved into nearby trees, but these were different from before, more complex, layered, almost like writing. He photographed them and said they reminded him of pre-Columbian glyphs, but not from any culture he recognized. The patterns repeated in groups of 4. 4 lines, 4 circles, 4 triangles, 4 dots. Everything in 4s. I noticed my own counting habit had intensified. 4 steps between positions, 4 seconds between commands, 4 breaths to steady my pulse. The number had taken on significance beyond routine. It felt necessary, protective, like breaking the pattern would invite disaster. At 900 hours, we finally established solid radio contact. Base command came through clear for the first time in 18 hours. I gave a full situation report. Multiple casualties, equipment malfunction, possible hostile presence, requesting immediate extraction. The response shook me. Command said they'd been tracking us on satellite for the past 12 hours. According to their data, we hadn't moved at all. Our GPS coordinates showed us still at the second checkpoint, 12 miles from our actual position. They said our thermal signatures were stationary, grouped in a tight cluster despite the fact that we'd been moving constantly. I confirmed our coordinates 3 times. We were at the river. We'd traveled over 10 miles. We had physical evidence of movement, but satellite data showed otherwise, as if we existed in 2 places simultaneously. Command ordered us to maintain position for aerial reconnaissance. A helicopter would overfly our coordinates within the hour to verify location. Until then, hold and observe. We waited in defensive formation, watching the sky. The smoke made visibility poor, but we'd hear rotors long before we saw the aircraft. I kept checking my watch, counting minutes. 4 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes. The pattern helped maintain focus. At exactly 1 hour, we heard the helicopter, faint at first, growing louder, approaching from the north. The sound was wrong, though. The pitch fluctuated unnaturally, revving high, then dropping low like the engine was struggling. Costa pointed skyward. Through breaks in the smoke, we caught glimpses of the aircraft. It was circling, but not over our position. It was miles to the east, right where command said our GPS coordinates indicated we should be. I tried to raise them on radio. No response. The helicopter made 3 more circles, then headed away. Within minutes, the sound faded completely. Command came back on radio and said visual confirmation negative. No personnel visible at coordinates provided. They were calling off the extraction and ordering us to report to original checkpoint for pickup in 24 hours. I tried to explain that we weren't where they thought we were. But the signal degraded again. The last thing I heard was, unable to confirm your actual position. Navigation sur Meton appears compromised. Recommend return to last verified coordinates. Then nothing but static. We were on our own in the deepest part of the burn zone, cut off from support, with something tracking us that understood how to manipulate our technology and perception. The realization settled over the team like a weight. I could see it in their faces. This had gone beyond mission parameters. We were dealing with something that operated outside natural laws. Mercer asked what we should do. I gave the only answer that made sense. We would move toward higher ground, away from the active burn zones, and try to reach the original checkpoint on foot. It meant 2 days of hard travel through hostile terrain with limited supplies. But staying here meant waiting for whatever was circling us to make its next move. We packed up and moved out at 1100 hours. The heat was brutal, pushing past 100 degrees. The forest seemed to press in from all sides, even in burned areas where trees stood as skeletal remains. Every step felt watched. Every sound seemed deliberate. After 4 hours of movement, we found the 3rd checkpoint, or what was left of it. The supply cache we'd established on entry was destroyed, not ransacked. Destroyed with precision. Medical supplies scattered and burned. Food stores torn open and scattered. Water containers punctured and drained. Everything ruined but left in place, as if to send a message. You cannot sustain yourselves here. Among the wreckage, Professor Torrens found something that made him call me over urgently. A journal, partially burned but mostly intact. It belonged to one of the previous teams that had gone missing. The last entry was dated 6 weeks earlier. I read it aloud to the team. Day 12. The fires follow us no matter which direction we move. The patterns are deliberate. They're herding us toward the center of the burn zone. We've seen them now. The Guardians. 4 of them. Always 4, made of smoke and ash and something else. They don't attack. They just watch and wait. The local guides say, we've crossed into territory that belongs to the forest itself. They say the Guardians are older than human memory, that they appear when the jungle is dying to remove the infection. I think we're the infection. I think we're not meant to leave. The entry ended there. The rest of the pages were burned beyond reading. Costa looked at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. Fear, yes. But something else, too. Understanding. He said quietly, they're not trying to kill us. They're trying to make us leave. And if we don't leave soon, we'll become part of the forest like the others. I wanted to disagree, to maintain command authority, to insist on rational explanations. But standing there in the ruins of our supply cache, holding a dead man's journal, surrounded by evidence that something was systematically dismantling our ability to survive, I couldn't find the words. The sun was dropping lower. We had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I made the decision. We would push through the night, moving as fast as the injured could manage, heading due west toward the edge of the burn zone. No stops, no camps, no defensive positions. We would move until we reached clear ground or dropped from exhaustion. It was the only choice left. As we prepared to move out, the knocking started again. 4 strikes from ahead, 4 from behind, 4 from each side. 16 knocks total, echoing through the burned forest like thunder. The sound rolled over us in waves. Each impact felt as much as heard. Then something new happened. The ground itself began to vibrate. Not an earthquake. Something else. a deep thrumming pulse that came in groups of four. 4 pulses, pause, 4 pulses, pause. The rhythm matched the knocking exactly. Dr. Vance's instruments went haywire. She shouted that seismic activity was spiking across the entire region. The readings showed coordinated vibrations emanating from 4 distinct points, all equidistant from our position, all pulsing in perfect synchronization. Whatever was out there wasn't just watching anymore. It was actively demonstrating its presence, its power, its control over the environment itself, and we were standing right in the center of it. We moved fast, ignoring proper tactical spacing in favor of speed. The injured men pushed through pain without complaint. Everyone understood what was at stake. The vibrations continued for another 10 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as they'd started. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. The forest changed as we traveled west. The burn damage became sporadic, patches of destruction separated by areas of untouched jungle. But even the green zones felt wrong. The vegetation was too still, too quiet. We saw no animals, heard no birds, found no insect activity. It was as if every living thing had fled, leaving us alone with whatever claimed this territory. At 1900 hours, full darkness fell. We activated night vision equipment and continued moving. The world turned green and grainy through the optics. Thermal imaging showed the environment cooling rapidly, temperatures dropping below 70 degrees. Unnatural again, impossible again, but real. Then we saw the fires. Not wildfire, something else. 4 distinct blazes, each burning in perfect isolation, arranged in a square pattern, approximately 1 mile on each side. We were inside that square. The flames rose straight up without spreading, creating pillars of light against the night sky. No smoke, no heat radiation at distance, just pure fire burning without consuming fuel. Dr. Vance's instruments registered temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the fire sources, yet we felt no warmth from our position. She said it violated thermodynamics. Professor Torrens said it violated reality itself. Costa stopped walking and turned to face each fire in sequence, north, east, south, west. He made the sign of the cross again, then said in English, "The Guardians are showing us their boundaries. We're in the center of their domain." I wanted to argue, but the evidence was undeniable. 4 fires, 4 directions, 4 entities we'd encountered. The pattern was too precise for coincidence. Mercer asked if we should change course, try to move between the fires. I considered it, but something told me that would be worse. Whatever rules govern this place, breaking them deliberately might trigger a response we couldn't survive. Our only option was to keep moving toward the weakest point in their perimeter and hope they'd let us pass. We continued west, maintaining our heading despite the fire burning directly ahead. As we closed to within half a mile, details became visible. The flames formed a column roughly 20 feet in diameter, reaching at least 100 feet high. At the base, I could see shapes moving, 4 of them, circling the fire slowly, their forms silhouetted against the light. The Guardians, watching, waiting. At 2100 hours, we were 400 yards from the western fire. I called a halt to assess the situation. Through binoculars, I studied the figures circling the flames. They were definitely the same entities we'd seen before. Tall, broad, moving with perfect coordination. But now I could see something else. They weren't solid. Smoke and ash seemed to flow through them, parts of their forms dispersing and reforming as they moved. They looked like they were made from the forest itself, animated by something beyond physical laws. Dr. Vance whispered that she was detecting massive electromagnetic pulses emanating from each fire. The readings suggested the flames were generating some kind of field that extended in all directions. We were inside that field, had been since entering the burn zone. She theorized it might explain the navigation failures, the perception distortions, even the temperature fluctuations. The Guardians weren't just watching us. They were controlling the environment around us. I made the decision to approach directly, weapons lowered, but ready. If they wanted to stop us, they'd already had countless opportunities. The fact that we were still alive meant something. Maybe they were giving us a chance to leave on our own terms. We advanced slowly, maintaining formation. At 200 yards, the heat finally reached us. Not the searing intensity Dr. Vance's instruments indicated, but enough to feel uncomfortable. The air shimmered between us and the fire column. At 100 yards, the figures stopped circling. All four turned to face us simultaneously. They stood motionless, waiting. I could see them clearly now. 7 to 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in what looked like burned vegetation or ash that moved like living smoke. Their faces were visible but indistinct, features suggested but never quite solid. Eyes glowed faintly, reflecting firelight with colors that shifted from orange to green to violet. I took 4 steps forward alone. Behind me, I heard Mercer call my name, but I didn't stop. Something told me this moment required direct contact, commander to guardian, whatever that meant. At 50 yards, I stopped. The heat was intense, but not unbearable. I could feel it pressing against my skin like pressure. The smell was overwhelming now. Burning metal, ancient earth, something organic and timeless. It filled my lungs with each breath. I spoke clearly, knowing they could hear even if they couldn't understand. We're leaving. We acknowledge this territory belongs to the forest. We won't return. For a long moment, nothing happened. The 4 guardians stood perfectly still, watching. The fire burned without sound. Even the wind had died completely. Then one of them moved. It stepped forward, separating from the others, and raised one arm. The gesture was slow, deliberate, almost human. It pointed west, toward the edge of the burn zone, toward safety. The meaning was clear. Go, and go now. I nodded once, turned, and walked back to my team. Nobody spoke. We simply started moving west again, faster now, almost jogging despite exhaustion and injury. Behind us, the fire column began to collapse, flames dying rapidly until only smoke remained. When I looked back, the guardians were gone. We traveled through the night without stopping. The forest gradually changed around us. Burn damage lessened. Green vegetation increased. Animal sounds returned, faint at first, then growing stronger. Birds called in the darkness. Insects hummed. The jungle was alive again. At dawn, we reached the edge of the burn zone. The transition was stark. Behind us, blackened destruction. Ahead, healthy rainforest stretching to the horizon. We crossed that boundary and immediately felt the difference. The air was cooler, cleaner. The oppressive weight that had pressed on us for days lifted suddenly. Dr. Vance checked her instruments and reported all readings returning to normal. Electromagnetic interference gone. Temperature stabilizing. GPS functioning correctly. We were outside the affected area. I tried the radio again. Base command responded immediately, clear and strong. They reported receiving our signal for the first time in over 30 hours. I gave them our coordinates and requested immediate extraction. They confirmed helicopter en route. ETA 20 minutes. While we waited, Professor Torrens examined the tree line behind us. He found one last set of symbols carved into a massive kapok tree. Different from all the others. 4 vertical lines, perfectly parallel, burned deep into the bark. Below them, burned into the wood with precision that seemed impossible. 4 words in English. The forest remembers. Leave forever. Costa read it and said softly, "They let us go. They could have kept us, made us part of the ash like the others, but they let us go." I asked him why he thought that was. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Because we understood. We acknowledge their domain. That's all they wanted. Recognition that some places don't belong to us." The helicopter arrived exactly on schedule. We loaded up quickly, secured the injured, and lifted off. As we climbed above the canopy, I looked down at the burn zone stretching below. From altitude, the pattern was unmistakable. The fires had burned in a perfect geometric design, 4 large sections connected by straight lines, forming a symbol that covered over 400 square miles. a warning to anyone who could read it from above. We flew west toward base camp in silence. Nobody spoke about what we'd experienced. What could we say that would make sense to anyone who hadn't been there? We reached FOB Chimera by 900 hours. Medical teams immediately took the injured. The rest of us were separated for debriefing. I spent 4 hours answering questions from intelligence officers, environmental specialists, and military command. I told them everything, showed them Dr. Vance's data, Professor Torrens' photographs, the journal we'd recovered, every piece of physical evidence. They listened without judgment, took notes, collected samples. Then they classified everything under environmental hazard protocols and told me the mission would be filed as equipment malfunction with casualties due to wildfire exposure. No mention of the Guardians, no mention of the symbols or the impossible fire patterns. Just a routine training accident in hazardous conditions. I asked about the previous teams that had gone missing. Command said they'd been recovered and debriefed separately. All survivors reported similar experiences, but agreed to classification for operational security. The burn zone was now permanently restricted, designated as unstable ground with ongoing geological hazards. That was the official story. The truth stayed buried in classified files that would never see public release. We rotated out of Brazil within a week. The entire unit was reassigned to different posts. Mercer went to Germany. Costa returned to Sao Paulo. Dr. Vance and Professor Torrens were transferred to other projects. I received orders for Fort Lewis, Washington. They scattered us deliberately, ensuring we couldn't compare notes or build a collective narrative. Before leaving, I returned to FOB Chimera one last time. I wanted to look at the burn zone from a distance, to see it in daylight, without smoke and fear obscuring my vision. I climbed to the highest observation point and looked east. The forest stretched endlessly, green and dense. But in the center, visible even from 20 miles away, the burn scar remained. And at its heart, I could see 4 distinct areas where no vegetation had returned. 4 dead zones arranged in perfect cardinal alignment, each exactly the same size. The pattern was still there, still marking territory that didn't belong to us. I thought about the journal entry we'd found. Some things belong to the land, not to us. I understood that now. The Amazon wasn't just forest. It was something older, something conscious in ways we couldn't comprehend. And when threatened, it defended itself with forces that operated outside human understanding. The fires had been no accident. They were a response, a message written in ash and flame, this far and no further. 6 months later, I received an encrypted message through military channels. No sender identification, no routing information. It contained a single photograph taken from satellite orbit showing the Amazon basin from above. Someone had marked 4 locations on the image. Each mark point was a restricted zone. Each showed the same geometric burn pattern. Each had a history of missing personnel and unexplained phenomena. There were dozens of them, scattered across the entire Amazon region. Dozens of places where the Guardians had appeared, had marked territory, had defended the forest from human intrusion. And beneath the photograph, a caption in Portuguese, "They are waking up more now. The forest knows we are killing it. The Guardians multiply." I deleted the message and never spoke of it, but I thought about it often. Still do. It's been over 20 years since Operation Firebreak. The Amazon continues to burn more every year. International agencies fight the fires, report statistics, measure loss in acres and species. But they don't understand what they're really fighting. I've read reports over the years, firefighting teams that disappear without trace, satellite imagery showing fires that move against the wind, rescue helicopters that report seeing figures moving through smoke, too large to be human, too coordinated to be animals. Every report is classified, filed away, forgotten by everyone except those who've experienced it firsthand. Costa emailed me once, years after our deployment. He'd returned to the Amazon as a civilian, working with indigenous communities on conservation projects. He said the tribes all knew about the Guardians, different names in different languages, but always the same description. 4 protectors that emerge when the jungle itself is dying, taking form from the elements to drive away the threat. He said they're appearing more frequently now. The tribes are leaving regions they've inhabited for centuries because the Guardians are becoming aggressive. No longer content to warn, they're actively attacking. People vanish. Equipment fails catastrophically. Whole villages are found abandoned, marked with symbols burned into every structure. The forest is fighting back, and we're losing. I still count in 4s. Can't break the habit. 4 steps between positions, 4 breaths when stressed, 4 seconds of pause before making decisions. The pattern stayed with me, like muscle memory from those days in the burn zone. Sometimes I wake at night, hearing 4 knocks echoing through my dreams. Always 4, always precise. And sometimes, after heavy rain, I smell it again. Burning metal and ancient earth. The smell of the Guardians. It lasts only seconds, but it takes me back immediately. Back to the jungle, back to the fires, back to the moment I understood we were facing something we could never defeat. I keep the classified mission files in a secure location. Copies of everything we recorded during Operation Firebreak. Photographs, data logs, witness statements. One day, when the world is ready to accept what's happening in the Amazon, that evidence might matter. Until then, it stays hidden, like the Guardians themselves. If you ever find yourself in the Amazon, deep in areas marked restricted on official maps, and you see smoke rising in perfect columns from 4 directions, leave immediately. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just acknowledge what you're seeing and leave as fast as you can. The Guardians give one warning. Sometimes they let you leave, like they let us leave. But if you stay, if you challenge their authority, you become part of the forest. Your bones fertilize the soil. Your story becomes another classified file that no one will ever read. That was 1994. We met something older than human civilization, something that existed before we learned to make fire. Something that will remain long after we're gone. And it taught us the most important lesson soldiers rarely learn. Some battles cannot be won because some territories were never ours to claim. The Amazon belongs to the forest. The Guardians make sure we remember that. Don't turn off yet. If this story connected with you, you know what it means. And watch the next one showing up on your screen, because some mysteries don't end when the mission does.